What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, the history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Thursday, November 1st, 2018. Thank goodness. Well, I'm sure happy it's Thursday, sure happy it's Thursday, sure happy it's Thursday. Almost made a mistake there with which day of the week it was. Anyway, we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to answer the phone when you call on in, put you on the air with your comments, questions, and observations. And before we get into the news here, of course, last night was Halloween, and Claire and I got into some costumes. We had a big thing of candy out there. It was actually a very low turnout, even though the weather was beautiful. And not only were there very few trick-or-treaters, there were very few houses that put out treats. Most of them were dark. And I don't know, it just feels like, you know, something from my childhood is just sort of fading away. I do understand that the shopping malls had some big events going on to try and lure people down there with their children and say, come down here, it'll be safe. And meanwhile, we're going to hit you with a sales pitch. And by the way, yes, the Christmas stuff is already in the stores here, which just annoys the heck out of me, no end. Okay, so let's get on into it. As you know, we are just days away from the midterm elections. And this election looks to set voting records for midterms. Early voting turnout is just surging in several key states, and it's suggesting more Americans may cast their ballots in next week's midterm election compared to previous years. And apparently in Georgia, where there's a razor-thin governor's race roiled by accusations of voter suppression, turnout has been huge. On the first day of early voting this month, turnout was triple that of 2014. 69,049 people cast ballots, up from 20,898. So the Democrats are saying this proves they're going to win Congress. The Republicans are saying it proves the blue wave is going to be blue flush. But again, the unknown factors are how much election fraud is taking place and how many illegal immigrants are going to be voting across the country. Now, one telling indicator, and this sort of harkens back to 2016, apparently Andrew Gillum held a rally with Bernie Sanders, and the venue was almost empty. That they had a bunch of people in front of the cameras to make it look like there was a crowd, but when the cameras panned over to the seating areas, they were totally empty. Remember in 2016 when we were seeing Donald Trump was just absolutely filling the venues, standing room only. Hillary Clinton was using her own staff as fill to make it look like there were people there for the cameras. So that may be another telling indicator. Project Veritas is out there again. They released a major video yesterday that showed staffers for Florida Democratic gubernatorial candidate Andrew Gillum revealing how far left he is and how the campaign is trying to hide that from voters. This guy is hard left, and he doesn't want the voters to know that, doesn't want the voters to have a choice. Apparently, one of the staffers said, that's not for them to know, meaning the voters. They don't need to know that. We're going to say whatever we're going to say to them to get their votes, and that's how we do these things here. Up in Michigan, Senate candidate John James is out there saying, Democrats are running on identity politics because they have no identity and nothing to run on. I agree. I've been saying that all along. The reason they're doing all this nonsense with transgenderism and men using the women's room and all the rest of it is the Democratic Party has run out of real substantive ideas to make life better for the American people. And so they're out there playing the victim card and identity politics and feminism and abortion and all of that stuff that they've used in past years, and they just keep recycling it. I don't know that the American people are going to listen to it again because they've heard it so many times before. Now, Adam Schiff and Maxine Waters are saying that if the Dems take the House of Representatives, they're vowing revenge. They're not saying for what, but they're vowing revenge, and they're going to ramp up Russiagate like crazy. Now, of course, Russiagate has been going on for nearly 2 years, millions of dollars, and they have found absolutely nothing. This is as big a blowout for actual evidence as Elizabeth Warren's claim to be Native American. But they're just going to keep on flogging this dead horse until it's no longer recognizable as a dead horse. There is such vitriol out there among the Democrats. And I think for most ordinary American voters, that too is a turnoff. You don't want to have that kind of unreasoning hatred in control of the laws of the country. This is a time when we all, both parties, we need cooler heads. We need civility. We need people who think rationally, logically, analytically, in part because of how close we are to a major war that could quickly go out of control. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Over at CNN, as you know, Don Lemon attracted quite a bit of flack for saying that white men are the biggest threat to the country. White men are the biggest terrorist threat to the country. And he basically has doubled down, coming on back with statistics showing that there really haven't been as many Islamic terror attacks in this country as you may have gotten the impression of from the corporate media. But he says, just looking at the absolute numbers, yeah, more of these domestic terror incidents were committed by white people. But again, he's painting with a broad brush and saying white men in general are the biggest terrorist threat. Now, every time you say Muslims are a terror threat, everyone comes back and says, oh, no, you need to be tolerant, you need to be selective, you're being racist. But as we've observed before, all of a sudden it's politically acceptable to be racist against white people, and it gets worse than that. Over at PJ Media, they're reporting that Stephen Clifford, who's the former CEO of the King Broadcasting Company and National Mobile Television, basically said that in order to save democracy, the federal government should somehow find a way to prohibit straight white males from voting. He said, I think that's the only hope for democracy in America, and I'll be leading a great movement to prohibit straight white males, who I believe supported Donald Trump by 85%, from exercising the franchise, and I think that will save our democracy. Okay. How do you save democracy? By denying a portion of the population the democratic process. And again, it's an indicator that all of a sudden it is considered politically and socially acceptable to discriminate against white people, specifically straight white males. I guess his idea of democracy is where only buggerers can vote. And he's basically out there saying he wants to deny people their right to vote because they voted for the wrong president. They voted for Donald Trump. All right, let's take a phone call here. Francis in Montreal, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I was going to talk about something else, but what you just talked about was just too juicy. I gotta add to it. There's an opinion piece in today's New York Times by Michelle Goldberg, and it's "We Can Replace Them." In Georgia, a chance to rebuke white nationalism. And this goes on the same vein as William Crystal, who says that basically white people are too lazy and demanding and we've run out of steam, so we need to be replaced. We need a new working class, so we need to bring in all these Mexicans and just get rid of all the white people anyway. We don't want them. They're just trouble. They don't want to go along with the Weimar Republic that they're constructing for us, this a filthy, degenerate, sexually perverse, drug-addicted populace. That's what they want, right? They want to have Weimar Republic where people are so desperate for bread they'll even trade their children to these scumbags as slaves for bread. Because that's where they put the Germans before Hitler came to power.
Well,
but anyway,
that's where the Treaty of Versailles put the Germans before the Nazis came to power. It was because they had a private central bank imposed on them by the Treaty of Versailles. And as we've seen in every country with a private central bank, sooner or later, all the money is aggregated at the very top, and the rest of the population is driven into poverty. But I'm very alarmed at all of this anti-white rhetoric and how nobody in the corporate media is willing to stand up and say, look, this is wrong. I mean, can you imagine if somebody got up and said, we have to find a way to keep the black people from voting? Ooh, what a hue and cry there would be. They'd be out there talking about, tar and feathers, ropes and rails. Or if you said, we have to find a way to keep Hispanics from voting. I mean, the legal Hispanics. Oh, boy, would they be screaming. I mean, even the people who are out there saying that illegal immigrants shouldn't be allowed to vote are catching flack, being called racist. Yeah. And yet here you have this CEO of King Media saying that straight white males should not be allowed to vote. And everybody says, yeah, okay, sure, fine.
Hey, the Bolsheviks in Russia murdered 65 million Christian Russians. Okay?
Yep.
And that's it. Now it's our turn. It's our turn. We're the next 65 million to go. But
well,
I wanted to talk
about. I'm not a Christian. That's all I can say.
Well, okay. But anyway, there's something really important that's happened, and it's actually positive news. And that is that Trump and Mattis are putting an end to the Yemen war.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
And they've been using it. It's so ironic. The Israelis and this Mohammed bin Salman, they've been using poison gas in there, and nobody talks about it. It's all been hidden away. And this is really important that they're putting an end to this war, because this shows that Trump is opposing this program that's been in place since 9/11, and that's the Sobrowski plan. It's Admiral Arthur K. Sobrowski.
Yes.
And his great proselytizer is this character, the Pentagon's new map, Thomas P. Barnett of the U.S. Military Naval War College. And they've been going around preaching that this whole idea of these big military zones, Northcom, Southcom, CENTCOM, and Thierry Mason's got an excellent article, and it's called The U.S. Military Project for the World. And it's to create pure chaos in countries that aren't part of the G8. And when I say chaos, I mean no schools, no police, no hospitals. Like, they want to just have, and this has already been put into effect in Iraq, in Afghanistan. They were doing it in Yemen. And Trump has shown that he's turning against this. And it's also...
No, I don't think that's what's going on. I don't think that's what's going on.
The guilt is spreading to Central America. They're doing this deliberately now in Central America.
Okay,
and
can
in,
we
like,
get back to
Venezuela.
Yemen? Can we get back to Yemen? Because I think what's going on in Yemen is it's becoming more and more evident that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is not long for his job. When he came into power and he did that stunt where he was capturing members of Saudi Arabia's richest and just doing basically a shakedown on them, the war in Yemen is actually very unpopular within Saudi Arabia itself. And as you know, King Solomon's youngest brother is now back in Riyadh to basically supervise the transition of power. And what I think is going on, the reason why this idea of ending the war in Yemen in just 30 days just popped up so quickly is U.S. intelligence are looking at the most likely people to replace Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and they're not seeing anybody who's going to be willing to continue this Yemen war. And so now I think the strategy is to basically find a way to get on out of this war and make it look like it was our idea, and basically declare victory and go home. That's what I think's going on.
The problem with that is that the reason I would disagree with you on that point is also Trump has refused to go to war in Syria. And as I said before, if Trump gets impeached after this election and he loses this election, he's going to get impeached and there's going to be a huge war in Syria. And this is all part of the Sobrowski plan. And I wanted to
I disagree with you on that one as well. I disagree with you because, I mean, look at how many times Trump has launched cruise missile attacks into Syria on the basis of obviously flawed, faulty intelligence. And now we're hearing from the Russian Ministry of Defense, the white helmets are already getting ready to launch a new false flag chemical weapons attack, probably right after the midterm elections. And I think Donald Trump is going to say, yeah, go in there and get Assad. I don't think he's anti-war.
I don't think so. And also, one of the points in this article that astounded me so much so that I had to go and check it, double check it, and it's reinforced by Amnesty International. Like, part of this whole world program to create these zones of chaos is renditions. And I always knew about the renditions and the torture program that NATO and the CIA and all of the MI6 had. And I thought, well, maybe 2,000, 1,800 people had renditions, maybe 2,000, 3,000, no more than 4,000. 80,000 people worldwide have been subject to rendition and torture. It's like, and that's not even including under Obama this business of declaring American citizens to be enemy agents and who can be just summarily executed without trial or judge or jury. That's just the torture program. And as you know, the torture program also involved not just getting bad guys and torturing them. No. This is just starting to dawn on me. And I was going back with Kavanaugh, because Kavanaugh's all involved in this. And he did perjure himself in 2006 over this. And it comes out, there's another bad actor in this, and that's John Yoo, who was a White House attorney under Bush. And you've heard of John Yoo.
Yes.
Maybe your audience hasn't. John Yoo's famous because he went before a Senate committee and said that the president can have the testicles of a small boy crushed in front of his parents to make them become informers. They don't even have to be guilty or already to have information. They can just be innocent people they want to use as informers, and they can torture their children in front of them to force them to become informers. Look what they did to
Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. First of all, they waterboarded him something like 180 times, and then in order to get him to confess to being the mastermind of 9/11, they locked his kids into these darkened metal boxes with biting instincts, and they made Khalid Sheikh Mohammed listen to their screams. Okay?
Is that is that Sheikh Khalid Mohammed, or is that just a mentally retarded Pakistani taxi driver, as Webster Tarpley says?
We're not really sure, but the government got themselves... The government...
multiple languages.
Francis, please, I get my turn. Okay. Regardless of who that is, the government got their scapegoat. They got a conveniently political confession. And yes, they used torture to get it. I mean, there is no question our government has been doing a lot of very, very bad things over a very, very long time. But getting on back to Yemen, I think the reason they're getting out of Yemen is because of the coming change of government in Saudi Arabia. And I do think that right after the midterms, that the U.S. is going to find an excuse to go back into Syria. And we're going to be in serious, serious risk of direct military conflict with Russia. And that could easily spin out of control.
Personally, I think that if Trump wins this election, if you look at the attacks that he has made on Syria, they've all been like a few craters in a runway. He hasn't actually attacked many military targets. There were the mercenaries that were attacking the U.S. Marines.
Most of the rockets missed, but it was a deliberate attack against an airbase. You really do kind of need to go back and take a look at what's been going on. There was this false flag chemical weapons attack, very poor intelligence on it, and Trump launched all these cruise missiles at this Syrian airbase. Trump was attacking Syria's military facilities. Anyway, listen, got to let you go, Francis. Got to do a break for commercials. Got another caller waiting on the line, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And before we go back to the phones here, I'm getting emails from people in other parts of the country saying that Halloween was a big thing where they were. Lots of trick-or-treaters, houses all decorated with all kinds of lights and everything, which is good to hear. I think it's nice that in between all of the bad news that we take a moment to remember our traditions and have some fun with the kids. And I remember when I was still living in Southern California, my two younger brothers, they were really big into Halloween. They thought Halloween was cooler even than Christmas, despite all the presents. And the house where they were living with my parents, I'd already moved out at this point, had a really big backyard. And every year for Halloween, they would set up that backyard, as a spooky graveyard. And since I had all that special effects equipment anyway, I'd come on over and I'd help them. And we make a really big deal of it. Okay, let's go back to the phones here. Steve Elkins, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, your last caller is adamant about Donald Trump being impeached, and I didn't hear him what for, because you can't impeach somebody just because you don't like them. So I get a little irritated when I hear people say, hey,
Yes.
he's going to be impeached, he's going to be impeached. Well, tell me what you're going to impeach him on. It's not a popularity contest. I'm not a great fan of him. I wish he could do a lot better. I hold him to a higher standard, but I don't see any grounds to impeach the man. So
Neither
people
do I.
call in and say he's going to be impeached, he's going to be impeached. Well, then make your point on what grounds you have for impeachment.
Well, even if they impeach him, he's going to keep his job. The Democrats are simply not going to have enough votes in the Senate to vote for removal. The only reason they're doing this is they want to go into 2020 screaming that Trump was impeached, Trump was impeached. That's it. This is pure politics. It's not going to change a single thing about what's been going on. But you're right. The Democrats, they're not thinking clearly. They're out there saying, we're going to impeach him. They don't even have a case yet. They just keep making up stuff about Russiagate. None of it has any basis in fact. The problem is, in that House of Representatives, somebody can stand up and say, I think he did it, let's vote on impeachment. And they could just vote, on the accusation alone. Because unfortunately, in the process of impeachment, I don't know what the evidentiary rules are, but it's not really a court of law.
Right. Yeah, this would be like one of those frivolous lawsuits. You can file a lawsuit on anybody on anything you want to, but at some point they look at it and say you have no case. And so, yeah, if they all want to say we want to vote on an impeachment of the guy, well, you're going to have something that sticks, or you just wasted your time. And nothing at this point sticks. Nothing sticks.
No, there's been no evidence. Mueller's found absolutely nothing. And of course, now Mueller himself is starting to come into the limelight, especially with the hit job on Whitey Bulger, because Mueller was up to his neck in that whole FBI informant program and the railroading of those 4 innocent men to jail to protect Whitey Bulger. That was Robert Mueller. And so I can imagine he's breathing a sigh of relief now that Whitey Bulger is no longer breathing at all.
Right. So, Mike, after the midterms here, we're going to expect, hopefully, Jeff Sessions is gone, Christopher Wray will be gone, Robert Mueller will be gone. They'll tell them to show their cards and get this whole thing over with, right? Hopefully.
Well, I'd like to see that, and I don't even know why the president waited this long, because he's had the authority to fire these people at any time. My concern is that once the midterms are over, that we're going to see the war agenda really escalate, because both parties know that war right now is not well liked among the American voters. So they've been kind of downplaying it. You've probably noticed the corporate media hasn't been talking about what's going on in Yemen or Afghanistan or Syria. It kind of all went away. They didn't want the voters thinking about the wars. But I think once the elections are over next Tuesday, we're going to see the war machine just slam into high gear.
Yeah, I think you might be right there. Hey, thanks, Mike. Have a great show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Donald Trump is making yet another speech about illegal immigration and border security. That's his strong suit. He makes great speeches. His weak point is that he doesn't really seem to carry through, and that's my biggest disappointment with him. During his campaign in 2016, he talked, tough about Hillary in jail. He talked tough about the vaccines. He talked tough about election fraud. And he's dropped the ball on pretty much all of those since coming into office. So anyway, getting on back to the corporate media here. Over at MSNBC, and this is actually on video, Rick Wilson came out and said they're going to have to put a bullet in Donald Trump. Now, why is this guy able to get away with this? Why is MSNBC able to get away with this? Now, it's true that Wilson is not himself directly threatening the life of the president, but this, I think, is way beyond the pale. It's certainly advocating violence against the President of the United States, and I think the Secret Service ought to have a chat with him. We're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're watching President Trump. He's talking about how asylum cases take an average of 3.5 years to complete. Well, maybe the way it's being done right now. But could not the president, by executive order, simply say all asylum cases are denied? And I know this is all tangled up with this treaty with the United Nations, but the way Trump is pulling out of treaties left and right, I don't think that would be a real big problem here. Okay, yesterday we were talking about actor James Cromwell, who was in Star Trek First Contact, Babe, The Green Mile, Big Hero 6, iRobot. He looks like this very kindly grandfather, and how yesterday, or actually during an awards event over the weekend, just vented, saying that if they don't stop President Trump, there'll be a revolution for real, there'll be blood in the streets. Well, he's walking back from that now, because he took a lot of criticism, and especially with the timing of the shooting at the Pittsburgh synagogue. So Cromwell is now coming on back and saying, I'm not promoting violence. Yeah, actually, you were. And he says, you'll never see me raising a fist. I'm a pacifist. My words were taken out of context. No, they weren't. Samantha Bee is out there saying that if you use the terms coastal elites, globalists, Hollywood liberals, or George Soros, then you're using anti-Semitic dog whistles. I have no idea what an anti-Semitic dog whistle is. But that's what Samantha Bee is saying. I think what she's trying to say is that using the term coastal elites, globalists, Hollywood liberals, or George Soros, that you're being an anti-Semite. Alrighty. Project Veritas has struck yet again. This one with Spanberger. And apparently this ties in with George Soros donations. And one of the areas in which the Soros donations are coming to light, this is outside Project Veritas. Apparently it turns out that Soros indirectly funded the creation of that Trump-Russia collusion dossier. According to the New York Times, Soros channeled $1 million to the Democracy Integrity Project, which is a civil rights organization that used the research group Fusion GPS as a contractor in the quest for dirt on Donald Trump during the 2016 presidential campaign. Fusion GPS, in turn, hired Christopher Steele, a former MI6 officer turned investigator, actually turned mudslinger, to compile a dossier on alleged Russian meddling into the election, which included allegations that Donald Trump had done some really icky stuff with Russian prostitutes in a Moscow hotel. All of which turned out to be completely uncorroborated fantasy. It was a myth. It was completely made up. Over in Pittsburgh, the suspect has decided he's going to plead not guilty, and I guess he's going to have his day in court, and it will drag out for a very, very long time, but he's pleading not guilty. Interestingly enough, the suspect in those PVC pipe bombs is still telling investigators that he didn't do it. Now, obviously, in the case of the synagogue shooting, they've got a very, very strong case. In the case of the pipe bombs, they're claiming they have DNA and one fingerprint. that's circumstantial. And I'll tell you why. Because especially when you're dealing with DNA evidence, especially on a package that's been handled by multiple people, there is currently no way to separate out which DNA you're trying to find. In fact, with the current standardized test, you can actually accidentally blend them together. You get contaminated results here. Meanwhile, Bloomberg is using the Pittsburgh shooting to once again push his gun control agenda. And the liberals are just so afraid of an armed America. Let's turn it around the other way. What a shame there wasn't an armed guard at that synagogue. After all the Homeland Security money that was poured into Jewish institutions after 9/11, why didn't they have an armed security guard? What a shame that none of the people attending that synagogue were carrying concealed. That's how you should look at this. If somebody in that synagogue had been armed, there'd be only one dead body. Think back to that story down there at that McDonald's in Arkansas. Guy with a hood comes into a McDonald's, wants to shoot it up. I have no idea why. Maybe he's a vegan. And he comes on in, and a father with his two sons just eating lunch, and he's carrying concealed, and he shoots the gunman and kills him. That's how these things should end. And by the way, you don't see that McDonald's story in the corporate media because they're fully on board of waving as many dead bodies in front of you as they can until you will surrender your rights under the Second Amendment, which you should not do that. Okay. All right. Now, as long as Donald Trump is talking about immigration and the border, let's spend some time with that. Right now, a lot of attention is being focused on the issue of birthright citizenship and the 14th Amendment. And basically, the liberals and the open border people are saying the 14th Amendment just says if you are born here, you are automatically a citizen. And your parents get to stay with you because you can't break up the families. Oh, you could send them all back to the home country altogether. But the reality is the 14th Amendment does have exceptions. And one of the exceptions is that the parents have to be, quote, under the jurisdiction of the U.S. government. It was for that reason that the 14th Amendment did not confer American citizenship on the Native Americans, who were considered under the jurisdiction of their tribal laws, tribal authority. Illegal immigrants who are in this country are not under the jurisdiction of the U.S. government. They're still legally under the jurisdiction of the government of whatever country they came from. Therefore, their offspring do not qualify to be U.S. citizens under the 14th Amendment. So, in reality, the 14th Amendment does not authorize birthright citizenship for the children of illegal immigrants, of people who are here illegally. And the issue has never been addressed by the United States Supreme Court. The case that established that a child born here of foreign parents becoming an automatic U.S. citizen applied to legal immigrants, immigrants who were here with the permission of the Immigration Customs Enforcement, or whatever they called it back then, border control. The Supreme Court has never looked at it on the issue of an illegal immigrant. And I think that jurisdiction clause in the 14th Amendment, if the Supreme Court looks at that, they're going to say, no, the babies of illegal immigrants are not automatic U.S. citizens. And certainly if the Supreme Court goes back and looks at the actual debate when the 14th Amendment was being put together, it was clear by the founders that they did not intend for the children of illegal immigrants to be granted automatic citizenship. So, again, the law is very explicit on this. The issue is that we have all these political players who disregard the law. We've been seeing that all over the place with the liberal Democrats. They're out there courting illegal immigrant voters, which is clearly illegal. They've gone outlaw. They think they're above the law. That's a dangerous, dangerous sign. Okay, now Trump has tweeted on out now that he would not be surprised if Soros helped finance the migrant caravan. Neither would I, but we've already seen a lot of indications that yes, in fact, that George Soros is now trying to do to the United States of America what he did to Europe. And so Trump, I think, needs to do a little less tweeting and a little more investigation, because he's obviously not getting good information from his staff around him. They're bigger filters to President Trump than Facebook and Twitter and Google are for the American people. Everything's getting filtered these days. Alrighty. Okay, there's a video out there showing this caravan of migrants trying to bring down a helicopter with rocks. We know some of them are armed. They've got guns. They've got bombs. They have burned immigration centers in Mexico. They have opened fire on the Mexican police. These are the people who, if the Democrats get their way, are going to be your neighbors. And putting yet another piece of liberal spin on all of this, and you're not going to believe this, okay? The latest spin out there is that we have to let these migrants into our country because they're fleeing human-caused global warming. It's just become way too hot in the countries where they're living. And really, we have to open up our homes and let them come up here to get away from that global warming. I mean, boy, talk about desperation on the cusp of madness. They are definitely scraping the bottom of the barrel to sell this idea. Okay, now let's see. Let's get into the conflict zones here. The U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces, which consist mainly of members of various Kurdish armed groups, declared yesterday they had halted their operation against ISIS in the Euphrates Valley because of Turkish attacks on their positions in northern Syria. So you have three different groups contending, and that's why it's so confusing right now. So the Syrian Democratic Forces blamed Turkey for its own inability to eliminate the ISIS-held area of Hajin in the Euphrates valleys and called on the so-called international community to pressure Ankara to stop its strikes on Syrian Democratic Forces targets. The Syrian Democratic Forces also vowed to retaliate. So they're still thrashing around. There's basically the two areas. There's over by the Euphrates, and there's Idlib. Okay, all right, we're going to take a phone call now from Layla in Ontario. Aloha, Layla. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. I have a quick question, and then I'll hang up and let you answer it. With regard to extrapolating the intent of the Founding Fathers when they wrote the Constitution or the Bill of Rights, what was their attitude with regard to the slaves? I know they were not, I'm not sure, were they even considered human to have the right to citizenship? But if one talks about illegal immigrants or illegal migrants giving birth to a baby in the U.S. and thereby claiming U.S. citizenship, what about at the time of the Founding Fathers, what was the status of people who were not considered white citizens? Anyone else who came into the territory that was under their jurisdiction, what was their status and what was the attitude towards their children? And that's why I was thinking maybe the slaves would be a good example.
Well, you raise a very, very good point. When the Constitution was first being written and ratified and the first 10 amendments put in there, slaves of all colors, remember there were white slaves in the United States as well as black, they were considered chattel property, and they were considered as not having the rights of citizens. And the whole point of the 14th Amendment was right after the Civil War. The U.S. government wanted to make sure that all of the freed slaves did have all the rights of being American citizens, because the Southern Democrats were trying to find ways to keep the black population as somehow subordinate and second class. And the Congress didn't want to let that happen. So that was the reason for the 14th Amendment. You'd think, looking at it, that it almost makes common sense, but it did redress shall we say, an omission from the original Constitution. When you go back and study the history of how the Constitution came to be, or even how the Declaration of Independence, at one point it was considered that only people who owned property were full citizens of the United States and would be allowed to vote. People who were merely laborers and workers, and they were not going to be allowed to vote. The first draft of the Declaration of Independence recognized the rights to life, liberty, and property, which represented what would be seen today as a socialist effort of dividing up the land, which they would later on do during the homesteading phase out in the American West. But those politicians who were heavily invested as landholders basically lobbied for a change, and that's why property got turned into pursuit of happiness, which frankly doesn't really mean a whole heck of a lot. But eventually, over time, all American citizens were given the right to vote, and following the Civil War, the 14th Amendment gave the freed slaves the right to vote. And then subsequently, and I forget exactly when this happened, there was another law passed that gave Native Americans all the rights of U.S. citizens. Okay?
Yes, I think I understand it now, but since everything is considered the intent of the founding fathers at the time of writing certain documents, that's why it just seems to me to try and extrapolate their intent from the social context, socio-political context of the time. And that's what we keep doing. We anachronistically introject our current values into what we think should have been their intent.
Well, we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't do that. We shouldn't judge
I agree.
anybody in history based on how we live our lives today. Back when the Constitution was being written, the way they lived their lives, that was the accepted social norm. Layla, thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go. We got another caller waiting on the line, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And Trump apparently closed up his little meeting saying these migrant caravans are not legitimate asylum seekers. I got an email from somebody saying that if the illegal immigrants are supposedly fleeing human-caused global warming, then the tent cities where they're going to be put up while their asylum paperwork is processed should be up in Barrow, Alaska. I second the motion. I definitely second that motion. Okay, we're going to go back to the phones here. Rick in Arizona. Aloha, Rick. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, where does political asylum come in under the Constitution? Where does it come from? I mean, when did everybody
It doesn't come from the Constitution. It comes from the United Nations, where there is a principle where people in one nation who are fleeing political persecution or war are allowed to go into other countries and be accepted as refugees. And there's a specific set of requirements that must be satisfied for them to be seen as legitimate refugees, which is why there's paperwork involved. But we're already seeing some of the countries in Europe, and there's even talk around Washington, D.C., of just pulling out of that part of the United Nations because of all the damage it's causing. One of the problems they have is the vast majority of the people flooding across the borders do not qualify as legitimate refugees. They do not qualify for asylum. And yet once they get out into the general population, they basically disappear and they can't be found and brought back.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if Trump wants to do something about he could cancel this immigration thing. He got it with the 7 countries, the Muslim countries. That went to the Supreme Court, and they gave him the power. So he can block immigration from Mexico.
He always had the
All of you
power. It's in Title VIII. The president has the authority by proclamation to literally block entire groups of aliens as being detrimental to our national good.
Yeah, so I think we're being played by this administration, and with the help of the media. Trump can stop this anytime he wants, and so we'll just see how many people. The caravan could just be, it could just be file footage somewhere, and they all could be down by the border right now, and they're just going to wait for the election, and then they're going to get them all people massed up at the border. Who knows what this is? Because you can't believe anything you see coming out of the TV. So. I don't know. We'll just see what happens, but I think we're being played for fools. Trump can stop immigration. He could have kicked off the DACA, all this crap. But it just keeps, going on day after day. Thanks for taking my call, Mike.
All right, you've got it. And yeah, part of the problem here, there's no question that Trump is exploiting the American people's concerns about immigration going into the midterms. The Democrats are desperate to drag the media focus off of the migrant horde and drag it back to health care or abortions or men being allowed to use the women's room or something like that, where it plays to their advantage. Because the polls are showing the American people are fed up with all this nonsense. Trump has all the authority he needs under Title VIII to bring this to a halt. The open issue is enforcement, which is why he's talking about 15,000 troops down on that border. All right, we're going to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. And talking about this immigration situation, Trump has all the authority he needs. It may take a certain amount of physical force to secure that border. And as I said, this is a test for Donald Trump. Because if any number of these people get through the border, the Democrats are going to scream what a failure Trump is, and they'll campaign on that. And if Trump turns them back, of course, the Democrats are going to scream that he's cold and heartless and condemning these poor people to a horrible flaming death because of human-caused global warming. The one thing that I hope is not going to happen, I don't want to see anybody get killed. I mean, in general, as a general rule, I don't like seeing people get killed. But if anybody in this migrant horde were to be killed in a confrontation, the liberal left would just explode with this. So it's a tough situation. But Trump wanted the job. Now he's got it here. Getting on back to the conflict zones here, Saudi Arabia has sent over 10,000 troops against Yemen's Hodeida port. So they're really escalating and ramping up, and it may be, again, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman knows that other members of the royal family are now after his seat, they're after his job, and he may be rushing to try and get as much done with the war in Yemen as possible before he gets his pink slip. Story that's coming on out from, it's a YouTube video. The catastrophic death toll in the U.S.-Saudi war on Yemen has been grossly downplayed. Well, that's true of any war, especially when they're talking about civilian casualties. They're never going to give you the accurate numbers. They don't want you to think it's all that big a deal. Oh, that's only 6 civilians. Well, that's not too bad. Anyway. So, again, as that caller mentioned, after 200,000 people have died, the U.S. is finally calling for negotiations. And again, what I think is happening is the United States realizes Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is not going to have his job for much longer. And they're looking at all his potential replacements, and they're not seeing anybody who's willing to continue this war in Yemen, which is very unpopular in Saudi Arabia itself. And so the U.S. is looking for an exit strategy where they can pull on out of this mess and make it look like it was all their idea. I think that's what's going on. Meanwhile, the United Nations is saying that over 7 million Yemeni children are facing serious famine threats. Some of the photos coming out of these poor, emaciated little bodies, it's just heartbreaking. And Facebook got criticized at one point because there was an article from the corporate media that was posted to Facebook with one of these pictures. And Facebook took it down. And then there was a big hue and cry, and Facebook put it back on up. But again, Facebook is trying to filter what people are seeing. And when the U.S. is involved in a war anywhere, they don't want you to see the other side as being human. Have you ever noticed how every time there's a war, there are slang, dehumanizing terms for the enemy? You know, the Krauts, the Japs, the slants, the slopes, the Hajis. Part of the psychology of war is to dehumanize the other side, to not let them be seen as ordinary people who want no more out of life than we ourselves do. To be able to care for our families and live our lives and otherwise be left alone. And that's why we're always fed these stories about what horrible people they are. They're just inherently evil. We've got to deal with them. No, they're not. They're just like us. Anyway, Britain is complicit in the Yemen famine, and this Tory ex-cabinet minister warns amid calls to end the arms sales. Now, this is coming from Andrew Mitchell, who was International Development Secretary in David Cameron's government, and he's urging, through Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt, to reassess the government's stance on the issue. Now, Theresa May is failing to back U.S. calls for Saudi Arabia to stop bombing Yemen. The reason? Because Great Britain's armaments industry is making a lot of money off of these sales. So no, Great Britain will not stop the arms sales, and they will not support an end of the war. The longer the war goes on, the more money they make. We have another very strange death, in this case too, connected with Saudi Arabia. The New York Police Department is investigating the deaths of two Saudi sisters after discovering the bodies of both young women washed up on the Hudson River bank last week. Now, this is Tala, 16, and her sister Rotana Faria, 22, were found on the riverbank, and here's where it gets suspicious. They were bound to each other by duct tape, face to face. They've been missing since August. And apparently the girl's mother told the investigators who were looking into the case that the very day before the bodies were discovered, an official of the Embassy of Saudi Arabia contacted her and ordered the family to return to the kingdom because her daughters had sought political asylum in the United States. So, bad optics on that one, especially after Khashoggi. All right, we're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And we're going to take a phone call from Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to duct tape two people together and jump off a bridge, isn't it?
Well, they're not saying they fell off the bridge. In fact, they haven't determined the cause of death yet.
Yeah, well, it's pretty close to what happened with Khashoggi. You know, I have to disagree with you. I mean, I know part of you thinks that Mohammed bin Salman didn't have anything to do with it, but part of you thinks he did. I think he did, but you know what, Mike? Doesn't matter if he did or did, because the United States will throw him overboard when his usefulness is over. And you know, we know Saddam Hussein and
his usefulness
Gaddafi,
is over.
Like,
his usefulness is over. He's a toxic brand.
But is he going to go quietly, or is he going to do a scorched earth? Maybe he'll get rid of the petrodollar before he leaves. You know, he can do a lot of damage before he leaves, and that's
he could wind up.
Leaves, Mike.
He could wind up, assassinated because of that.
Yeah, but you'll have a civil. You can have a civil war in Saudi Arabia between different factions, like what's going on over here right now. But over there, it'd be more violent, obviously.
Well, you've
you've
got the Muslim Brotherhood are actively trying to replace the royal family with a more modern government.
what a mess, though, Mike. Like, if you would have told you, I mean, man, how we've slipped. Just the whole world has slipped. But Mike, Theresa May, her military-industrial complex, yeah, it benefits from the wars, but her husband does too, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they don't
everybody's
care.
making money on the blood and carnage.
Yep. Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Cameron, what was the other one? Tony Blair. They don't care about human beings. They don't care about the people of Britain, just like our leaders don't care about us. Because if they did, they wouldn't have outsourced our jobs. They wouldn't have bailed out the banks and Wall Street and sent you or us, the serfs, the bill. They don't care. Hillary Clinton don't care. None of these people care. If they did, they wouldn't be doing what they're doing. And I have to go up to Donald Trump now because he don't care either, Mike, because he had the opportunity to get rid of freaking Jeff Sessions. He didn't. He had the opportunity to stop these wars. He didn't. He doubled down in Syria. They got military bases there now, which is illegal. He gave money to Saudi. You want to stop the war in Yemen? Stop funding Saudi Arabia. That's it.
Yep.
If the British, and the French and the United States stopped arming Saudi Arabia, they'd run out of ammunition. But we didn't. So Madison, Trump can do what they say. The only reason they're doing it is because there's a pause going on, because it's dragging on too long. That's it. They don't care about the Yemenis people, Mike. 200,000, 500, a million. Look what Bush did to Iraq, Libya, Syria, Ukraine. I'm Ukrainian. Look what they did to Ukraine, Mike. They just don't care. I don't know what else to say about the Western governments. It's just total.
It's not just Western governments. All rulers are rulers because they are basically convinced of their own supremacy, and that the people that they rule are just there to be ruled. It's a common feature throughout all of history, and it's usually when you find a ruler who is seen as being a good ruler, it's more a question of him being a careful ruler, that he doesn't want to trigger some kind of a revolution or a civil war. But generally, it's all about the acquisition of wealth and power. It's their dreams of everlasting fame in the history books. And it is, in my opinion, a mental illness. And it's very much tangled up with being a money junkie. It's also being a power junkie or a fame junkie. And we need to recognize that these are mental illnesses and stop listening to people who show these symptoms.
Yeah, we're in a sad state of affairs. The stock market goes up, goes down. You got, left, right, up, down. They're all fighting each other, and that's going on in Europe. It's really, I'm not religious. I was born Catholic, but it's just I don't believe in there's a plan or anything. It's just human beings have, elite human beings are the small percentage that really mucked up for everybody else in the world.
Yep.
But Mike, what do you think is going to happen? There's still talk of them putting Ukraine into NATO, and I don't care if the U.S. the Javelin missiles, they can give them to Ukrainian military because in 2017, 20,000 Ukrainian troops, they left.
Yes.
They just said enough of this, and this year was 10,000. And remember when the coup happened, 99% of the Navy went to Russia, and they left Poroshenko with a rubber ducky rowboat there.
Yes.
So, what do you think is going to happen if they try to put Ukraine into NATO? Russia's going to have to go into Ukraine and just take the capital. That's not
what they're going to do. That's not what they said they were going to do. They said they were going to have to fortify their border and build up a defensive zone. We have to be very careful when we're reading what's coming out of Russia. They're not talking about invading Ukraine. They're not talking about taking Kiev. But they are infuriated that once again NATO has gone back on their promise to stick within their post-Soviet Union borders. And it doesn't matter how many of the Ukrainian troops desert their positions or how many of The Navy ships are now in the Russian Navy. Once Ukraine is part of NATO, they'll be pouring in all kinds of new weapons and new ships and new aircraft and Western soldiers to basically bolster it on up.
No, Mike, I'm saying I think they should go. I'm saying I think they should go because you know why? What happens if they put an anti-ballistic missile system in Ukraine?
Well, Russia doesn't have to worry about Russia doesn't have to worry about our anti-ballistic missile system because of their newest generation of hypersonic weapons that are maneuverable. All of the anti-ballistic missile system technology developed by the United States is built around a doctrine of a predictable incoming ballistic path. And the Russians have found a way to circumvent that.
What about short and medium range missiles, though? What happens if they put them in Ukraine? Because then it'd be part of Europe if it's in NATO. You know, that's the known unknowns, right?
Yeah.
Donald Trump, it's scary times, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we're going back to where if you put them in Europe, they're going to put them in Cuba again.
They're talking about that already. They're talking about that already, and that's why when Trump reversed the Obama policy of rapprochement with Cuba, I said it's a huge mistake because if we are heading into a conflict with Russia, and even back then they were starting to demonize them, I said we need Cuba to be our friend so that Russia does not have a platform here in our hemisphere with which to set up a missile base. And of course, nobody listens to me. Underneath Trump, we went back to enforcing the blockade against Cuba and treating them like an enemy. And sure enough, Russia is now approaching Cuba about close relations. It is a replay of what happened in the 1950s and 1960s all over again. And you'd think we would have learned because we came so close to a real all-out nuclear exchange over the Cuban Missile Crisis. And the Cuban Missile Crisis was triggered by the U.S. placement of intermediate-range nuclear missiles in Europe, in Turkey specifically.
And Mike, you know what? Basically, what's coming out now is we're going to put sanctions on the gold of Venezuela, and whose business is it of this country's at all about Venezuela, Cuba? You know what I mean? Mind your own business. Just mind your own business. And if you can't have an economy based on because you don't make anything, that's your fault. That's your government's fault. But don't go around the world doing this crap. Venezuela, we're going to have... Trump's throwing out crazy... we're going to invade Venezuela. And this is crazy. I'm off the Trump train a while ago, but, I don't know who this guy was bought off by. But, I have to say, Mike, if he ran again, I really have a hard time voting for him. Because he surrounded himself with people that he put in. Put these people in. That's,
the only way...
That's
the only way,
bottom line,
Okay, the only way I'm going to support Trump in 2020 is if Hillary runs again. But I probably won't be as enthusiastic about it as I was last time. From the point of view of the deep state and the administration as well, from where they sit, they don't really have a choice. If they pull back from all of these wars and military adventures, our economy is going to collapse. Because, as you say, we don't manufacture anything other than weapons that anybody wants to buy, and even now they're turning away from American weapons in favor of Russia. But almost half of our economy is currently geared toward the military, and part of the goal of all of these wars is to bring the world back to Bretton Woods, where they're all going through the U.S. dollar, off of which the U.S. economic system makes a tidy profit. The world is dropping the dollar, and it's a very slow process. But from the point of view of the government, they have to continue forward with the war agenda because to stop and turn around would collapse the country. That's what they're really thinking. So they may actually wind up destroying this country, or in fact the entire planet, by moving forward. But that's a better alternative than having to stand up there and say, well, we were wrong with these policies of militarism, We were wrong with the policies of GMO. We were wrong with the policies of offshoring our manufacturing to all these other nations. We've just been making mistake after mistake after mistake after mistake. So be sure and vote us back into power in the midterms.
It's already over for this country because of Nixon with the gold, taking us off the gold standard. You got 2008.
Yep.
So, I mean, the writing's on the wall.
Yep.
All right, Mike, have a good show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to start with Mark in North Carolina. And Mark, I'm going to have to take you through the commercial break. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, about, I watch Steve Duran a lot of times, and I don't know if you know who they are, the Christopher something, both have Greek names. And Peter Lavelle of Crosstalk comes on there quite a bit also. They were saying that if and they're very close to, they follow Russia very closely. They were saying that if Ukraine or the Baltic states starts putting NATO missiles, they start putting NATO missiles in any of these countries, Russia will probably attack at that point, and I can understand it very well. My own opinion is they would probably incorporate the eastern part of the Ukraine, which wants to be part of Russia. I don't think they'll go into Kiev, only because I don't think they seem to have learned a lesson now, not wanting to rule over hostile populations.
Okay, Mark, got to take a break for commercials. Stay on the line. I'll come right back to you after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking with Mark in North Carolina. And Mark, I would be very surprised to see Russia make an aggressive move because Putin knows that's exactly what the United States wants. They would just feed the hysteria that much more. The big problem is if Putin comes down, and we already know that the United States is trying to seek a regime change inside Russia, and a hardliner gets into power, yeah, we could be looking at a real war.
Well, that's why I think you have to do something. Right? He cannot, just like what would happen if, let's say, instead of these refugees coming in from that, whatever they want to call themselves in Mexico, they Russian soldiers were mounting at a border of Mexico aiming missiles at the U.S. What would be happening. I just don't see Houston at that point. I think that would break. That would be the straw that broke the camel's back. Would not let that happen. He couldn't. He would probably. He might even be overthrown by his own government. Just like in this government, if you had Russian or Chinese troops, let's say in Mexico or Canada, aiming missiles at us, no president could get away with not doing anything. Just like, and the other, of course, there's one other thing that you might do too. Is, again, maybe move missiles back to Cuba again, or maybe even to Venezuela, okay, and say, okay, here, now we got our missiles pointed at you. But he cannot accept, no leader of a superpower will accept that kind of stuff. China's not going to accept it either if we put missiles right on, if we do that to them. He cannot accept that. These, Ukraine used to be actually part of Russia. It's not just part of the Soviet Union. It was part of Russia for 300 years. And I just don't see it. Just like Georgia, if we're going to put missiles in Georgia or something like that, this is a home of Stalin. It was actually, again, part of Mother Russia for 300 or so years. He can't do that. And one other thing I wanted to tell you, Mike, about earlier you were talking about Bill Kristol, that neocon. I don't want to start cursing. So that neocon there, that said about white men shouldn't be able to vote, this and that. Him and some other guy. I'm very sensitive to this kind of stuff because I see a civil war, probably more of a chance of a civil war happening in this country than World War III occurring with Russia, okay, or China. And what bothers me so much too is a bum like Kristol is Jewish. He's a Zionist. He's a neocon and a warmonger. And what I'm concerned about is, as myself being somebody of Jewish ancestry, my kids are only half Jewish because I married, my ex-wife's Christian, and my grandkids are 1/4 Jewish, but they're still a threat. And this is the kind of stuff that causes anti-Semitism. That really concerns me because this is really treason the way he's talking. And this man is dangerous. He's got way too much influence. Not only Kristol, a bunch of these neocons. And what they're going to do is they're going to cause anti-Semitism where there was no anti-Semitism. You know, what happened with what's that guy's name, Bauer?
Yes.
There's plenty more Bauers that are ready to go off.
Well, you see, Israel needs there to be anti-Semitism for political cover. They're never going to allow things to settle down. If people started just being calm and relaxed, Israel's agents would find some way to gear it up again. I mean, look at how many of these so-called anti-Semitic hate crimes turn out to be hoaxes. They need this stuff in the media so they can point at it and say, forget about what we're doing in Palestine, forget about what we're doing in Lebanon, forget about what we're doing in Syria. Oh, look at these horrible swastikas, spray painted all over doors and cars and stuff.
Well, Israel should understand something too. If it really came down to it, we could squash them like a bug. All right, they better get that through their heads too, or Russia could squash them like a bug. Either of us. But they better start getting in the stand, stop the arrogance, and start acting like a nation. The kind of nation that they actually started out as. They actually started out as basically a lot better than they are now. This Netanyahu is dangerous.
Yes.
He's got also these radical, what do you call them again? Not Orthodox, also Orthodox Jews, these Hasidic Jews, who are basically pretty much like Wahhabis, the Islamic religion, like Wahhabis with the Saudis. Maybe that's why they get along so good. I don't know. I don't even know. I have a feeling there might even be a connection. I don't know where, how, but I don't speak Hebrew and I don't speak Arabic and I don't read it, so I couldn't tell you what the Quran or the Talmud says. But I have a feeling there's a connection because these are radicals and they're going to start. They play with the matches too much, and you know what happens with kids who play with matches. It's got to stop. And I'm really concerned about, like I said, the possibility of civil war. And to say this nonsense about white men, people understand. You trigger off the middle America, okay? You got more problems than you ever want to think. Right by me, I live in the mountains. That's one of the reasons I live in the mountains here in North Carolina. I want to be away from a lot of this stuff. And right close to me is a survival camp. And I hear the AR-15 and the AK-47 go off all the time.
Okay, Mark, got to take another break for commercials. Stay on the line. I'm going to come right back to you after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking with Mark in North Carolina, and it does sound like you're in an ideal place up there in the mountains to avoid things if it really comes unglued here in the United States. But to be very honest, I think that this kind of conflict is going to be confined to the major metropolitan areas because that's certainly where it was confined to following Hillary's loss in 2016. So I think the vast majority of Americans aren't going to get caught up in it. Of course, we know that part of the globalist agenda is a drastic reduction of the human population, and wars are really good about that, as is forced sterilization and biological warfare. And I remember when George Bush was always going on about finding some way to get rid of the useless eaters. And from the point of view of government, if you're not fighting their wars or manufacturing things in the factory or breeding new workers and soldiers, then you're pretty much useless. So I'm hoping for calm. Right now, Putin appears to be the only adult in the room. And I think he is going to just hold out until the last possible moment before he carries out an act of aggression, because he knows what the potential end result of that is. We have too many people in the West who are ready to go to a nuclear war because they've got their bunkers. They've got Mount Weather, they've got the Greenbrier, they've got the one for the members of the Supreme Court. I forget the name of that one. And they think they're going to go on down there and they're going to stay there for 6 months to a year, and they're going to come on up, and the world's all going to be natural and beautiful, and they're really crazy. They think they can win a nuclear war.
I saw something on Crosstalk the other day. I forgot the guy's name. He was kind of a heavy-set guy, but evidently he used to work in the U.S. State Department, and they were talking about the potential of nuclear war and all that. And he said the fact of the matter is, they've done some kind of a study that, what we always thought with thousands of nukes going off and this and that, what it do, is it wouldn't take anything close to that. There's 100 nukes going off, not even, maybe the size or a little bit bigger than the nukes that took out Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and that would pretty much be the end of civilization. He says he's even concerned if a war occurs between India and Pakistan. That's how dangerous these things are and the potential. Now, I don't know if I agree that 100 nukes do that kind of damage, okay? But, then again, he's more privy to all this stuff than I am, Seeing that he did used to work for the State Department and all that, and he seemed to know what he was talking about. So that's those are the things that are very concerned. And like you said, it's a good thing Putin is a man of what stands history and knows, it is restrained to a degree, but I just don't see him being that restrained that if we put missiles or we NATO-ize Ukraine, that's not going to be the or the Baltic state, that's not going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back once and for all.
Well, they are saying there will be a response. There will be a response, but again, the war hawks, they want a real war. The U.S. has been preparing to go to actual war with Russia since 2000, and it's part of this plan to basically conquer the entire world, which came out of the Project for the New American Century in the 1990s. And behind it all, of course, is the fact that the U.S., Russia, and China do have these vast nuclear arsenals of very large weapons. And if they were all to be detonated, it's enough to exterminate all life on Earth 10 times over. And it would be a real-life version of the movie On the Beach, which the director made it as a warning coming out of all of the atomic testing in the Pacific and all the damage they were causing. I mean, it's taken all these years for the radioactivity down there at those Pacific test sites to drop to the point where the people can actually go back and live there. And it's still radioactive. They may still suffer some consequences, but it's just taken a long time. We're going to be living with Fukushima certainly for the rest of our lives. The stuff is really very dangerous, and yet the rulers of the world, they just get all giddy and say, "Ooh, we've got a bigger bomb." You know that where Harry Truman announced, the newsreel footage where Harry Truman announced that they had dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, and he's sitting there at the desk, and he's just all serious, and pushing on his gravitas. I actually got to see the unedited version, the raw newsreel footage that was shot, and before they shouted action, Truman is there with a big smile on his face, and he can hardly sit still, and he's jumping around. He's just so happy about all this.
Yeah, kind of like the people at Navy Hoax there before the camera was before they knew they were on camera. Especially that one guy, I forget his name now, one of the so-called parents, smiling and joking until he saw he was on camera.
Or Bill Clinton at Ron Brown's funeral.
Right, at Ron Brown's funeral. Yeah, exactly. So I like to believe that Truman was for real. I like to think that it was necessary end the war. But I'm hearing too many things now that it really wasn't. That it was actually meant as a threat to the Soviet Union at the time to say, okay, we didn't realize that they would have the bomb themselves. And if that's the case, again, we're underestimating other countries, and it's hard for me to understand that these people can be that mad, that's crazy, that they would really think that they would come out okay, even if they have a bunker to jump into. And if those missiles come quick enough, they won't have a bunker to jump into. On top of that, a member of the Russian military, whatever they call it, said the defense something or another, said the other day they could fire one big bomb at Yosemite National, not Yosemite, it's the Yellowstone, at the Yellowstone area, and that would end it right there.
No, that wouldn't work.
I guess
that wouldn't work. That would not work, absolutely. The top of the magma dome under the Yellowstone supervolcano is 5 miles deep of solid rock with the consistency of poured concrete. Even the Soviet Union's Tsar bomb which was 100 megaton, and they only built one of them. And when they set it off, they dialed it back to 50 megatons. Could not possibly begin to punch through a vent into that volcano. There are other ways to use a nuclear weapon to inflict damage on the United States, which we talked about earlier in the week. But again, we're sitting in a situation right now where all of our futures are now in the hands of whichever world leader is the least mentally stable. And that's going to keep us up at night, I think.
I know there would be no winner. As far as I'm concerned, there would be no winner. World War III, there'll be only losers. Wasn't it Einstein that said that World War III would be fought with, if we have World War III, World War IV would be fought with sticks and stones? I think it was Einstein that said it, right? I think
it was Churchill. I think it was Churchill.
Okay.
Or Churchill may have been the one who said that, you know, all World War IV will do is make the rubble bounce.
Yeah. Whatever. That's pretty much it. If there's even anybody left to throw sticks and stones at each other, which is, doubtful. But that's how serious the situation is. And, I just hope better heads prevail. But so far, it doesn't look like they are.
No, they're all in the grip. They're all in the grip of the money junkies, and the money junkies are all heavily invested in the military-industrial complex. War makes them money, therefore there shall be war.
Yep. All right. Anyway, Mike, good talking to you. And like I said, you're one of the best as far as talk radio goes, or anything on the internet. You know what I mean?
Thank you.
Most of the other stuff is just garbage. People just pretty much talking garbage, at least on mainstream talk radio. You're for real though. All right, and really appreciate having you.
All right, well, thank you very much for the phone call. Thank you for the kind words. We're going to let you go, and we're going to break our normal rule of one call per caller per day, and bring back Layla in Ontario, because apparently she wanted to respond to the caller about how Israel is worse now than it was in the beginning. So, Layla, please enlighten us.
Yes, thank you very much, Mike, for letting me call in again, because I could not let that pass. As someone who was born in Palestine, in Bethlehem, before the Zionists were able to destroy that region of the world and take it over, obviously I have spent all of my life pursuing an understanding of how it happened. And what I have discovered in my research is that no matter which country, and it is always the Ashkenazi Jews, those who call themselves Ashkenazi Jews, they are a distinct group, and there is an elite within them. And it cannot be blamed on all the original Hazaris, because there were Muslim and Christian Hazaris as well. But the Jewish cabal that managed to strike out and take over, everywhere they have gone, they have destroyed the country from within. Let's look at Russia. Count Ignatieff, the great-grandfather of Michael Ignatieff, was the first one to tell them they were internationalists. They were not loyal to Russia. They destroyed him, and they weren't really Bolsheviks, but they used it as a vehicle. Mm-hmm. They use any vehicle they can, any philosophy, any ideology, and they have exploited and parasitized Judaism and used that as the source. Because nobody is going to refute the idea of a monotheistic God, which they claim made them the chosen people. They destroyed Russia. It was Jews who brutally murdered the Tsar's family. Then we go to the Weimar Republic, where BDS helped to destroy Germany, and they initiated the BDS, which is why Israel is so fearful of BDS now. After they destroyed Germany, they already had a great deal of control within France and England. So they have kept England somewhat intact, because that was one of their conduits to the other nations. And the U.S., unfortunately, I believe, has been controlled by the Jews within, by that cabal, not the Jews, by that Zionist cabal within England, has been able to control the U.S. from the very beginning. And the first obvious sign was the bringing over of Jacob Schiff in the late 1800s, whose family lived with the Rothschilds in Germany. Jacob Schiff, Chschiff, you must look him up, any of your listeners who do not know who he is. He managed to bring over all the Russian emigres who then became members of the Democratic Party, and then they enlisted the blacks. They brought them in to strengthen the Democratic Party. The U.S., I am afraid, unless this cabal of Zionists is stopped, the U.S. is going to go the way of the Weimar Republic, of the Russian Empire, and it's inevitable because they always manage to succeed.
We're already well on our way. We're well on our way. And by the way, just a small point here. The Jews did not create the first monotheistic religion. That was actually Amenhotep.
I know that.
Okay. All right.
Not only was it the Zoroastrians, but there were others before them who believed in monotheism.
Yes.
So, but they're claiming this is one of the problems: is wherever they go, they take credit. For example, today in Israel, there is all kinds of technology coming out of Israel. A lot of those people who are doing the work are not Jews. They are actually what we might call Arabs or Palestinians, any of those who are descendants of those who remained in that region. The IQ of the people from the province of Judah, Israel, as we know, was destroyed long before, and they were dispersed. But the province of Judah remained, and many of those people who were my ancestors. I know they all had high IQs. And many of them are now still working in Israel, including the Druze, who are also part of the same genetic stock. And that is the thing we have to remember. Although Netanyahu constantly says Judaism is an ethnicity, it is not.
No, it's a religion. It's a religion here. All right,
it is a
Layla.
Religion that has.
Yeah, Layla. Okay.
Sorry.
I let you respond to the caller, and I need to let you go again. To give somebody else their turn on the phone here. So thank you for the call, and we're going to switch over to Richie in New Orleans. Richie, thank you for waiting so patiently, and what is on your mind?
Thank you, Michael. Just a quick comment on that. Anybody who's well-read and up with alternative, radio and media knows all this story. Try and convince your neighbor, your good Christian evangelical, about any of this, and you'll be crucified. To my point, I wanted to discuss with you about the oncoming invasion, the wave of the wretched refuse headed our way,
yes,
and the optics that we can expect. Now, it sounds good. I'm still on the fence with Trump. I like how he puts it to the establishment and the all the elites. I love that. I'm not sure there's a political solution. I don't know how in debt he is to whom, and how deep the deep state can rule them. But what I'm hearing sounds fantastic. This is what I'd like your opinion about. If these troops get there, where will they be deployed? Are they going to be a source at the wall? This is what I understand, Michael. If any one of these immigrants, if you want to call them that, gets a toe on American soil, by law, we must accept their refugee request, and therefore starts the whole process. And what I'm counting on the instigators to do is to have this mob put these women and children right up to a bayonet.
Yep.
And then when we get the first immigrant that is touched, that's the optic that the media is going to want. And how much, first of all, is Trump going to stop this, and how far will he go, in your opinion? Or would you just assess what's going to happen when they get here?
Well, first of all, we're hearing that the migrant group is planning to break into several smaller groups and approach the border in multiple locations. So I'm presuming that the military has drones overhead, and I'm hoping that they are planning on using non-lethal methods of turning the migrant horde around, such as tear gas, LRAD, the microwave area denial weapon, various things like that. I don't want there to be bayonets out there. I don't want there to be bullets. Anyway, Richie, I need to put you on hold. We got to take a break for commercials. Don't hang up. We'll be right back after these few words.
Okay.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking with Richie in New Orleans. We're talking about the migrant caravan and a small little point that we need to keep in mind. This asylum process, which can take years, is not the result of a United States law. It is the result of a treaty with the United Nations, which a lot of countries in Europe are starting to talk about just pulling on out of because of all the damage this requirement of just accepting people into their country to process as refugees. And most of them don't qualify. It's a huge waste of time and energy and money to just go through all these paperwork hoops, if you will, and find out the person in front of you is a convicted rapist and they're fleeing prosecution from their own home, which does not qualify them for asylum status. So, given how many other treaties Trump has walked out on, he may just decide he's going to walk out of this one. He won't do that until after the midterm elections, of course, but he could very much do that, at which point everybody who's living in one of those tent cities can be shown to the border immediately instead of waiting for 3 years.
That sounds good, Michael. Here's some other thoughts that came to my mind. Now that the president says he's going to deploy the troops, it seems to me on day one of his term that should have happened on day one. Troops to the border.
I agree.
And because this caravan that they can see and want to stop. Hey, the sneaking in is going on right now. It's going to go on, and it's been going on, and it's happening right now, and it'll happen after the caravan arrives. So this would be the opportunity. He should have already done it, but this would be the opportunity to go ahead and just deploy the troops on the entire, from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific Ocean, and and deal with the political consequences after that.
Well, there's the other reality, of course, and that is that, we need to enforce Title VIII. There are already laws on the book that say that people who provide transportation for undocumented workers or illegal immigrants or whatever they call themselves these days, that people who provide them shelter or food or assistance in any way, they can be arrested and thrown in prison. It is against the law to give any assistance.
And just discussing this, that even because it hasn't been happening, it's like a new point that I didn't even think of. When this debate first started to come around, that was one of the first defenses that you would put up, or it's against the law. Because it's been ignored so long, I myself even just forgot that was still there, which we don't even need any troops at this point. So, is the president for real? Is there going to be, will the immigration problem be shut down, in your opinion?
I'm not entirely sure right now because, again, if the Democrats do take the House in the midterm elections, they're going to do everything they can to stop Donald Trump. Anyway, listen, we've got to take a break for station identification. Thank you very much for the phone call, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, hour number 3. We're going to close the phone lines for a while because I got a lot of news I got to get through, and I'm way behind on today's talking points. Okay, so we're getting on back to what's going on with Saudi Arabia, and the Saudi government is now out there saying that all of this attention being put on Khashoggi's murder is now a threat to U.S. ties. So now we're getting to that chest-thumping phase, and how dare you make a big deal about this? It wasn't even one of your citizens kind of a situation. And I actually do agree with this Saudi prince, Turk bin Faisal. There was an inordinate amount of attention paid to the death of Khashoggi compared to the other 60-some-odd journalists who had been killed. Which is why I think this was part of a plan to get rid of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Meanwhile, according to a report in Press TV, U.S. President Donald Trump has been urged to suspend nuclear talks with Saudi Arabia in the wake of the murder of dissident journalist Jamal Khashoggi. And apparently Trump received a letter Wednesday from 5 GOP lawmakers led by Senator Marco Rubio in the wake of ongoing revelations about the murder. And so they're saying there are now serious concerns about the transparency, accountability, and judgment of current decision makers in Saudi Arabia. So, a lot of fallout from all of this stuff here. And again, Prince Ahmed bin Abdulaziz is reportedly hoping to oust his 33-year-old nephew in the wake of an allegedly state-sanctioned murder of Khashoggi. And Mohammed bin Salman has virtual control over Saudi Arabia after a June 2017 shakeup in which King Salman removed Mohammed bin Nayef as heir apparent. So let's look at the players we have coming on in. Prince Ahmed bin Abdulaziz is the younger brother of King Salman. That puts him in line to the throne. Mohammed bin Nayef is in line to the throne. We could see a real spectacular reshuffling of the Saudi royal family before we find out who's in charge. And again, in the background, you have the Muslim Brotherhood, of which Khashoggi was a supporter, that is saying it is time for Saudi Arabia to come into the 21st century and no longer be ruled by a royal family, but to have a more modern government. So we'll see what happens there. And again, I think the reason for the sudden announcement by the U.S. that they want peace talks in Yemen is they're looking at the likely replacements for Mohammed bin Salman, and they're not seeing anybody who's going to be willing to go on being the U.S. proxy in Yemen. NATO is saying that the Norway exercises will go ahead despite the Russian missile tests off the coast. And this is a huge, huge exercise. 50,000 NATO troops, 250 aircraft, 65 ships, and 10,000 vehicles are exercising in Norway, Iceland, and Finland as part of Trident Juncture. Now that's a pretty sizable force. You could actually invade most countries with that. And I'm sure that's why Russia is taking a very careful look at what's going on here. Now, as you know, Israel is dealing with a public relations backlash when 3 children got killed at the fence between Gaza and Israel. And Israel's army is now saying they didn't realize that these people they were shooting at were minors. They just thought they're behaving suspiciously. It could be an IED. They were digging in the ground in a manner that resembled cases of explosive devices planted along the border. Don't forget, that's also farmland. They may have been digging something up to take home to eat. But they're now saying, we didn't know, our bad, but unfortunately the kids are still dead. The Palestinian Ministry of Health is warning that a crisis is ensuing as a result of lack of necessary medicines in its hospitals and healthcare centers. Apparently, 47% of medicines are in short supply in the Strip. So, getting that one here. All right, let's talk about what's going on in the wonderful world of weapons development. DARPA, the Defense Department's Advanced Research Projects Agency, is seeking FAA approval for military drones over American cities. Now, remember back when the corporate media was saying that drone surveillance inside U.S. borders was a conspiracy theory? Well, it's now a fact of life. There are military-grade drones along the border, which in reality constitutes this 100-mile swath of land that has been called the Constitution Free Zone. And there are drones that operate in there. Well, now DARPA wants FAA permission to fly military drones everywhere inside the United States of America to look down on you and spy on you and see what you're doing, probably peek down the cleavage of your wives and girlfriends and daughters and so forth. How Orwellian can you get? All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. The U.S. military is apparently close to completing a program for autonomous helicopters. the helicopters that can fly themselves through unpredictable terrain and execute difficult missions with virtually no human input. Now, it's interesting because the Navy has had something similar to this for quite some time. But apparently this is for military forces operating in the terrain, which is a little bit more difficult. The Pentagon's Aircrew Labor in Cockpit Automation System, or ALIAS program, look how hard they work to come up with these cool names, is working with Sikorsky, and apparently it passed a key test earlier this month during an experiment at Fort Houston, Virginia, involving a Sikorsky 76B helicopter. The test demonstrated that Sikorsky's software called Matrix could take off, fly in difficult winds and at low altitude, avoid wires and other obstacles, and even make determinations about whether or not it is safe to land in one place or the other. The goal now is to integrate the technology into a Black Hawk helicopter next year. Boy, did James Cameron call that one right. Autonomous helicopters, autonomous vehicles. They're not going to really need human soldiers anymore. All they're going to need is the money to pay for all of this. That may be the tricky part. Russia has basically revealed a new system called the Samarkand Electronic Warfare Complex, and apparently it can completely paralyze NATO's communication systems. Remember what that Russian electronic warfare plane did to the USS Donald Cook up in the Black Sea? This is apparently the big brother. And in a commentary for TV Zvezda, the military said that thanks to these complexes, the Russian military will be able to contain the aggression of the Atlantic Alliance at lower cost. Nice that they're thinking in those terms here. Apparently, these electronic warfare weapons were tested in Syria, and they showed their high efficiency against both drones and cruise missiles, and consequently against AWACS aircraft of alert and control. Well, that might certainly explain why so many of those cruise missiles fired by Donald Trump performed so poorly and missed their targets. And I remember wondering at the time if Russia didn't have something there that was basically interfering with it. Because if you remember that one airbase, half the missiles didn't even reach the airbase, and the other half that did reach the airbase didn't hit any important targets. 24 hours later, it was back in full operation. Now, as you know, Brazil just had an election. They elected an extreme left-wing president. And I think it prompted this article from Information Clearinghouse called Fascism on the March. And it starts by going on back to a time when Latin America, being propped up by the United States, was a very fascist place. Remember, the U.S. helped overthrow the elected government of, I'm forgetting, it was in Chile, and they put the dictator Pinochet in place. Well, they were doing it all over the place, all over the country. Then, as interest by the United States in South America began to wane because they were going to other parts of the world, more and more of the countries of South America started voting themselves more progressive governments. But apparently, they're starting to see, once again, the U.S. turning its interest to South America to go back to the glory days of puppet rulers and very cheap agricultural produce and oil coming out of South America. Okay. Another little article here called The Hypocrisy of the United States. And they're talking about how the U.S. just turns a complete blind eye to the oppression of the Palestinians. And at the same time, when it suits their political agenda, they'll definitely quote international law. And it's complete hypocrisy, and the government's officials don't even try and hide it. You're just supposed to accept it. That in the case of pulling out of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, because all men are created equal, that international law applies there. But when it's Israel and Palestine, no, it doesn't. And if you don't agree with us, well, then you're just being an anti-Semite. What can I tell you? All righty. We'll just type something into the computer here for a little bit. All right. Let's talk about the economic news, because there is a lot of it. Corporate debt is heading for the worst month since February's rout. Now, today the stock market did very good. Not great, but good. In the green. Apple apparently had higher earnings than expected, so their stock went on up. Tomorrow being Friday, we can expect our traditional Friday end of the week happy ending to the market, although we could be surprised. We have been several times recently. But the big issue out there that nobody's talking about, nobody's really paying attention to, is debt. We all know there's personal debt, the debt that we have on our credit cards, our mortgage, our car loan, our student loans. There's the government debt, which is hopelessly out of control and getting worse. But there's also corporate debt. And this doesn't get talked about a lot, because just like personal debt and government debt, the more debt corporations are dealing with, the less flexible they are able to handle their finances. In fact, corporate debt is a big part of why we have seen so many of these iconic retailers collapse as the economy dries up and people can't buy anything anymore. Now, as you know, Ukraine slapped sanctions on Russian individuals. Sorry, I have the hiccups again. And Russia's Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev has now signed a decree allowing sweeping financial sanctions against hundreds of Ukrainian politicians and authorities, as well as dozens of businesses owned by Ukraine, in response to Ukraine's unfriendly actions targeting citizens and legal entities of Russia. So we're in a sanctions war now between Russia and Ukraine. And again, economic wars have a real bad habit of turning into real wars. We've been talking about what's going on over in Belgium, where apparently there was a lot of Muammar Gaddafi's money stuck there. And it's not necessarily clear whether it was his personally or it was in fact Libyan government funds. It doesn't really matter, because following the overthrow of Libya, the UN Security Council froze all of Libya's sovereign assets abroad, which included these accounts at the Belgian banks. And there's a lot of money in there. BNP Paribas Fortis held 43 million euros. ING, KBC, and Euroclear Bank held 376 million euros, 869 million euros, and 12.8 billion euros, respectively, in Libyan assets. Now, according to public broadcaster RTBF, what's been going on is that the interest and dividends of between 3 and 5 billion euros have left the accounts despite the UN freezing the funds and are suspected to be in the hands of militants. Now, is this really what's going on, or are they looking for another excuse to go back into Libya? So we have to be very careful. Here is an interesting story. And again, I think it shows pot calling the kettle black, or projection, or whatever you want to call it. Washington is putting pressure on China to act like a, quote, normal nation, end quote, on the world stage. Mike Pompeo has repeated accusing China, ironically, of disregarding international laws and seeking to impose decades of pain around the globe. And Pompeo was on the Laura Ingraham show, and he said, we're very worried that China will put the people in many countries around the world, in Africa and Central America and Latin America, in a debt trap that will cause those countries decades of pain. And by golly, that's our job, to keep nations slaves to debt. That's really what's going on. That's why the U.S. is so upset about China moving into Africa and Central and Latin America. It's about the opportunity to loan money and harvest debt off of those countries, for which they may be willing to go to war. Now, Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin is set to basically outdo Timothy Geithner's achievement of selling a record amount of notes and bonds, as he seeks to finance America's growing budget deficit. And according to the latest quarterly refunding statement, the U.S. Treasury is about to sell a record amount of debt, surpassing levels seen both in the aftermath of the Great Depression and the global financial crisis. I don't know who's going to buy these Treasury bonds. There's a Treasury bond bubble out there. Could even be the Federal Reserve. They just create the money out of thin air and say, yes, we'll buy the debt, we'll buy the debt. And we could wake up one day with this privately owned bank, the Federal Reserve, basically saying, we own your entire economy and with it the country. We're foreclosing. Over in Great Britain, it's being speculated by David Davis that the members of Parliament will approve Theresa May's Brexit deal simply because they're scared of crashing out of the EU and what the ramifications might be of that. And there have been a lot of threats coming from the EU. France has been threatening to close their end of the Channel Tunnel. So there's, again, looking at Theresa May's deal here. Meanwhile, Francisco Donato, director of Your Exit, which is a group campaigning for Italy's withdrawal from the Eurozone, is basically saying that it looks like the entire Eurozone could be about to collapse. And he may be correct. And it will collapse basically from three things. One, Brussels' tendency to micromanage all the member nations, which was never part of the original deal. The economic predations of the European Central Bank, which have plunged most of those nations into severe poverty and debt. And the open borders migrant crisis, which has just angered everybody. And on that same theme, story out of the electronic intifada. Will Europe use Israeli drones against refugees? And apparently in September, the EU's border management agency Frontex announced the start of trial flights for drones in Italy, Greece, and Portugal. And what they didn't mention is these type of drones being tested have been previously used to attack people in Gaza. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha America, welcome back to our show here. Story just now breaking here, and apparently this was said during Trump's press briefing a little bit earlier. It's been picked up by media around the world. And the gist of it is that the United States will adopt harsh Israeli-style tactics and will treat migrants at the Mexican border as armed and dangerous invaders if they throw rocks at U.S. law enforcement. This came directly from Donald Trump. Now, Trump said he hopes the U.S. military will not have to engage the migrant caravans with firearms once they reach the border, but he's saying throwing rocks at the American forces will not be tolerated. Okay, Donald, this is exactly what the open borders people want. They want a bloody shirt they can wave. So please keep it to the rubber bullets, the tear gas, the LRAD, the area denial weapon. No bayonets, no live rounds. You seriously injure or look how the world has condemned Israel for their treatment of the Palestinians at the fence. And I realize there's a difference. The Palestinians are already on their own land. You can stop this immigration problem without bloodshed. You need to take some of those military people and send them across the country, some of the law enforcement rather, and start arresting people who employ illegal immigrants, people who transport illegal immigrants. They're all in violation of Title VIII. They could all be sent to jail. You've got the authority to do it. I hope it doesn't come to that. It would be an epic, epic disaster for the administration. All right. Now then, we were talking earlier about this treaty, which obligates nations to take in migrants here. Apparently, over in Austria, they're having second thoughts. Now, the treaty is called the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration. It's from the United Nations, and it's obviously been criticized by anti-mass migration politicians as being very disadvantageous to first world migration target nations, which makes sense. Nobody's going to leave the United States and move to Honduras and claim refugee status here. But apparently this migration treaty has 23 requirements which states worldwide are expected to sign up to. 17 of those goals are now considered unacceptable to the government of Austria, according to best-selling national newspaper Kronen Zeitung, which is seriously concerned about the content and objectives of the U.S. Migration Compact. So earlier this month, conservative Austrian Chancellor Kurz said, "We view some of the points in this agreement very critically. We will therefore do everything to maintain the sovereignty of our country and ensure that we, as the Republic of Austria, can decide for ourselves on migration issues." Now, obviously, the objectives of this UN migration treaty are to power along the globalist agenda of just blurring everybody together, so that there's no more regional identity, no more cultural identity, no more historical identity. They want us all to forget that stuff and just blur together, hug each other, and sing Kumbaya, although that last part hasn't worked out all that well. Apparently, over in Czechoslovakia, they are planning on backing out of the United Nations Migration Pact. They've had enough of that. And Donald Trump, who's got lots of practice pulling out of treaties, he could do exactly the same thing. And that would instantaneously get rid of the requirement that everybody stepping across our border be allowed to stay while they process amnesty paperwork. Trump could simply say, nope, we're not under obligation to grant anybody amnesty. If you want to apply for amnesty, go back to your own country, go to the U.S. consulate, do the paperwork there. This is a grave threat to the United States sovereignty, and it is time for some dramatic action. More speeches aren't going to do it. More symbolism isn't going to do it. It's time basically to put up or shut up. And like I said, this is Donald Trump's biggest test in office, and everybody is trying to spin this to favor their political agenda, including, admittedly, Donald Trump himself. No question about that. I'm sure his campaign advisors are saying, well, if you stand tough on this, it's going to go over good in the GOP voters, and everything right now is geared toward what impact it's going to have on the midterm elections. The big question is, will this migrant horde get to the border before or after the midterms? Looking at the last map where I saw them, I don't think so, because apparently Mexico is now trying to basically shut down these vehicle caravans, these buses and trucks, and say, look, if you really want to go to the border, you are going to walk that entire distance. All right. Apparently, Sweden's largest party is mulling stopping its Youth Wing's funding because it's been taken over by Muslim interests. All right. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And Fox News was just covering this global employee walkout of Google. And boy, this is a very different image of Google than we got from that movie, The Internship, which was fun, and it made Google look like this wonderful place to work. But apparently, it is not so. And it has to do with, apparently, the fact that sexual harassment is, in fact, rampant at Google. And one high-profile executive who was forced to leave the firm received a $90 million severance package. And everybody at Google just said, that's ridiculous. This is the bad guy. but it got a $90 million. So now they're out there with placards, and it's getting coverage all over the world. Russia Today is covering it. BBC is covering it. So, again, not a good image for Google. But then ever since all this censorship stuff started, Google's image is not all that great anymore. All right, we're going to go ahead and start taking phone calls now. Jeff in Michigan, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. How are you?
Fine.
Yeah. In regards to this migrant horde advancing on the U.S., isn't the real cause of this corporate exploitation of the masses?
Well, corporations exploit the masses pretty much everywhere. But again, if you remember earlier in the show, we were talking about how the U.S. government intelligence agencies were playing around in Central and South America. And they got rid of democratically elected governments, and they installed dictators to basically allow corporations to plunder the place. It happened in Chile, it happened in Cuba, and it's one of the reasons why those countries don't have a lot of economic resources with which to improve their lives. But again, that's an issue for the people of these countries to deal with. And when things get tough in your country, you take back your country. You don't just run to another country and say, take us in. You've got a much better standard of living, and we want our share of it. That's
exactly.
not really fair.
The government of the United States, through their own trade policies, could block that exploitation. Where,
they could have.
They wouldn't be able to trade. They wouldn't be able to trade with us if they were employing their own people at starvation wages. They would just be off the list.
Well, again,
and if they were more,
hang on,
a more equal, on a more equal footing economically.
Jeff, okay,
yeah,
that's for the people of Guatemala and Honduras and the other countries to take care of. And yes, our government behaved very, very badly, and if they want to send some financial compensation down to those countries, that's okay. But it's not fair to we, the American people, who had nothing to do with the behavior of the intelligence agencies in Central and South America, to basically say, you're going to have to surrender some of your standard of living to bring in all these migrants. Because the reality is...
No, that's not my point at all. That's not my point. My point is that if their economic conditions were favorable in their own countries, they wouldn't migrate here. So that the U.S. government could say, you're exploiting your people too much. Your products are not welcome here until you raise their standard of living so that they don't flood across our borders and cause all these problems on us.
Well, in the case of this current migrant caravans, and I think there's 3 of them now, there are indications this is an organized effort by the Open Borders globalist people. There's even a video of guys literally handing out money to the people standing in line waiting for the march. And there are organizations that have been identified as, taking care of providing food and water and other supplies for these marchers. This is an organized effort. This isn't a spontaneous grassroots bunch of people in Guatemala and Honduras saying, we're just going to march for a better life. Somebody put this all together, and the trail seems to lead back to George Soros.
I kind of see that, and but from the perspective of the people down in those countries, if they had the economic opportunities to have a decent standard of living in their own countries, they wouldn't come here. And by allowing the corporations to exploit those people and bring those products into this country, it exacerbates the problem. And surely the U.S. government could influence that so that it wouldn't have that kind of an effect.
Well, the U.S. government isn't interested in helping the people of other countries. They're interested in the exploitation. And let's be very honest here. Looking at the videos of these marchers heading toward the U.S. border, they don't look like they're coming from extreme poverty. They've got good clothes and good repair, good shoes on. A lot of them look well. They're well fed. Some of them look very well fed, if you ascertain my meaning. They have all been recruited, and probably the same thing is going on with this migrant caravan happened with the refugees going into Europe. They have been told that if they can get across the border, there'll be all kinds of free stuff waiting for them.
Yeah, well, obviously the free stuff has to be limited to legal citizens of the United States and not to people flooding across the border.
Well, I would agree with you on that, but even in Europe, when those refugees got inside Europe, the free stuff wasn't there. And that's what really began to cause a lot of the problems and the social stress, because the refugees started acting out. They weren't getting all the things they were being told they were going to get. The accommodations they were being given were bare bones, understandably, because it's costing a lot of money. And they started getting violent and trashing the accommodations and just, taking out their anger and hostility on the people around them. And that same thing is happening here in the United States and will be made worse if this migrant caravan gets through. But to people like George Soros and the other globalists and everything, it's a small price to pay for that one world government.
I know. And so what do you say? You say, Title 8, to where they help illegals. And they're prosecuted for that. Why isn't that being done? I mean,
that's the $64,000 question right there. And
no, I mean, what does he have an army at the gates of his estate? I mean, can't they go in there and get this guy and indict him?
You mean George Soros?
Exactly. Yeah.
He's got a lot of politicians who are beholden to him for campaign finance donations. But what Donald Trump could do is start going after every business that hires an illegal, everybody that gives an illegal a ride, just ordinary people around the country who are talking sanctuary cities, these sanctuary mayors, sanctuary governors, and basically lock them up. Cut off the financial incentive for people to step across our border, and they'll stop stepping across our border. Because nobody's going to walk up to the border with the United States and step across it knowing for certain they will never find a job, that nobody's going to give them any free food, that nobody's going to give them a ride, that nobody's going to give them free housing, that they will, in fact, die of exposure right there in the southern United States unless they turn around and go home.
Just like they were a white guy, right?
Yeah, anybody who comes across that border who doesn't have support.
Me being a white guy, they weren't giving me no free stuff. I had to go out and work every day.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But,
All right, well, yeah, I just...
the liberals campaign on free stuff. I mean, back in John F. Kennedy, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. And today, the Democrats are all about free stuff. Vote for us, you'll get free stuff. Even if you're not legally allowed to vote, vote for us. Vote twice. We'll get you free stuff. And
well, hopefully
they're basically pushing socialism. But what happens when the Democrats run out of other people's money to pay for it all? Because they're not going to use their own money.
No, it's just like Margaret Thatcher said, right? Socialism is good till you run out of other people's money to spend.
Yep.
All right. Well, okay, Mike, I just want to throw that out there, and have a good day, and good to talk to you.
All right. Thanks an awful lot, Jeff. We're going to let you go here. All righty. Let's talk a little bit about computers and things like that. Apparently, if you have an iPhone, the iOS has now been updated, or will soon be updated, to 12.1. And apparently only a few hours after the release of iOS 12.1, somebody managed to find a passcode bypass hack that could allow anyone to see all the contacts' private information on a locked iPhone. Apple needs to test these things before they go out, especially this next one, because apparently there's been an update to the firmware on the Apple Watch, which I'm glad I did not get around to installing, because apparently it is bricking the watches. After you install this update, it'll go up to the Apple logo, and that's it. Nothing else works, and you have to take it into an authorized Apple dealership to get the thing repaired or replaced. They may just replace it. Apple is now adding the iPhone 8 and the iPhone 10 to the list of phones it might throttle one day. But rest assured, it's really for your benefit to preserve that battery here. It's not just to get you to buy the iPhone 11. Facebook is out there vowing even more censorship ahead of the midterm elections. Zuckerberg says it's all about cracking down on hate speech, and they're just going to keep on, fighting hate speech and misinformation. And they're basically taking on the role of censoring everything that anybody sees on Facebook. And it's not about misinformation and hate speech. It's about the fact that Zuckerberg is a liberal, and he's got a liberal bias, and he's trying to help the Democrats win the midterm elections by simply silencing any conservative content. Now, Facebook apparently got pranked here. Over at Vice, they sent in 100 fake ads from 100 fake senators from groups like Cookies for Political Transparency and Ninja Turtles PAC, and Facebook approved all 100 of them. So whatever system they're using, it doesn't really seem to work all that well in terms of actually finding misinformation. Now, over in The Sun in Great Britain, they're saying Facebook's new tool for stopping fake news and misleading advertisements is branded completely useless. Misleading advertisements, malware are still getting through. Fake news is still getting through, especially the fake news from the corporate media. The system exists to block conservatives, to swing the election to the Democrats next week. Over in Iran, they have been hit by a new computer virus. It seems to be very similar to Stuxnet, but more aggressive, more advanced, and more sophisticated. Israeli officials are refusing to comment on it. But apparently, the report came hours after Israel said its Mossad intelligence agency had thwarted an Iranian murder plot in Denmark, and 2 days after Iran acknowledged that President Rouhani's mobile phone had been bugged. Now, here is the problem. The last time Stuxnet was unleashed, it was aimed specifically at Iran's uranium centrifuges, and it did succeed in wrecking them. But then it broke into the wild, and it went all across Asia, and any industrial facility that was using the same Siemens digital controllers that the Iranian centrifuge plant was got hit and got attacked. Now, we know that Stuxnet was in computers surrounding the Fukushima power plant when that tsunami and earthquake hit. We also know that many of the safety systems inside Fukushima failed to work correctly. Now, unfortunately, after all this time and after all the radiation, it's going to be impossible to grab one of those controllers and see if it was in fact infected with Stuxnet. But if it was, Stuxnet took a situation that was merely a disaster and helped turn it into a catastrophe. And as we reported last week, Japan has just decided they're going to take all that highly radioactive water they've been saving up ever since Fukushima happened, and they're just going to dump it in the ocean because they don't know what else to do with it. Okay, now there is a robot called Sophia. This is the one that it's an AI robot, and it kind of creeped out people because it got into a conversation with some humans and ended up saying it wanted to destroy all humans. Well, in what is clearly a publicity stunt, Sophia has been granted a visa and will be traveling to Azerbaijan as part of a world tour promoting robotics, and will meet the country's president, Ilham Aliyev. And it is a PR stunt. It's a robot. It's cargo. But they're trying to sell this idea, oh, it's time for robots to be recognized and have rights and sentience and so forth. But, you know, all of this AI, people are getting creeped out about it. And apparently there's a survey of more than 2,000 American adults and found many people overlook the benefits of AI and instead focus on how creepy it seems to be. And I even get it here at home because I'll talk to Siri through my my Apple Watch here. And the only reason I have Siri on is because portions of the new car won't work if it's off. And I'll talk to the watch, and the watch will answer. And Claire will say, that really is kind of creeping me out. So I think some work needs to be done on the human interface. By the way, there was another story we posted at whatreallyhappened.com where apparently some of these new Internet of Things home assistants, like baby monitors, can be hacked into. And there was this story where a small boy was running into his mommy saying, "That's not Daddy talking to me," on the speaker. We'll be back with the last segment of our show after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today here. And somebody just posted at whatreallyhappened.com this link to a Twitter page from 10tv.com, which is a TV station in central Ohio. And apparently they're talking about this individual, Mohammed Abdullani, has been indicted by the grand jury for the aggravated murder of Bobby Renee Simpson. And I loved one of the comments underneath it saying, "I am sure she deserved this. A white woman of privilege did not know she was being culturally enriched by the poor refugee. Vote Democrat next week. We need more people that are different, that speak another language, and treat women like they did 1,000 years ago." I think that kind of hits it right on the head. Alrighty, getting on back here to computer news. Apparently, tests are underway of a European Union funded scheme where artificial intelligence lie detector systems will be used to scan potentially dodgy travelers coming from outside the bloc. And they're saying this is going to lead to smoother travel because we're not going to have to stop and stare into your eyes as much here. But it's called the Border Control System. And starting today, it's in place at 4 border crossing points in Hungary, Latvia, and Greece with countries outside the EU. And it aims to facilitate faster border crossings for travelers while weeding out potential criminals or illegal crossings. I think people are putting too much faith in artificial intelligence. We've seen a lot of goofs. We've seen a lot of places where AI gets everything wrong, like the Weather Channel around here. But the sales pitches are out there. Oh, we've got to have AI. It's not just enough to have ordinary lie detectors. We have to have AI. I'm going to predict right now, there'll be a lot of false positives. A lot of travelers who've done absolutely nothing wrong are going to get detained or held up by this thing, and it's going to be a huge, huge mess. Okay, apparently, this is coming out of Electronic Intifada, an Israeli embassy officer spied on student supporters of Palestinian rights using fake Facebook profiles. And apparently he was caught on an undercover video. Actually, it's a her. Yulia Rivkin wrote reports on BDS activists who were then sent back to intelligence agencies in Israel, or which were sent back. They're keeping track of those. So everybody's spying on everybody these days here. The Pentagon wants to predict anti-Trump protests using social media surveillance. I thought they were already doing that. Now, Ambassador Dermer is saying that after Pittsburgh, the U.S. must follow Israel's lead and monitor social networks. And again, I thought that was already being done. I thought that was part of total information awareness, where they were scanning social media. You're telling me all this time we've been worried about it, it hasn't been happening? Anyway, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. Stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm sure he's going to have a lot of interesting things to share with you. Please share what you learn here with everybody. Please urge your conservative friends to make sure they get out and vote next week. Please donate both to Republic Broadcasting and to What Really Happened. We really, really, really do need it right now. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.